Good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful December 4th, and we're about to start our planning board meeting. The first item this morning is under preliminary matters. We'll do adoption of resolutions. We will skip the first one for now, and then we'll go to 2 through 5, and the 2 through 5 are 7025 Strathmore Street Preliminary Plan, 7025 Strathmore Street Site Plan, and 7025 Strathmore Street Forest Conservation Plan, and the last is Torquato Romano Landscape Contractor Forest Conservation Plan. Do I have a motion to approve these 4 resolutions?
I move to approve these 4 resolutions.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, 3-0. Next, we'll go to item 1B, approval of minutes. We have several today. 4 sets, the minutes of October 23rd, 2025, the minutes of November 6th, 2025, closed session minutes for November 6th, 2025, and minutes for November 13th, 2025. Do I have a motion for approval of these 4 sets of minutes?
I move to approve all the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, 3-0. The next is preliminary matters. 1C, Timberlawn Historic Site Amendment to the Master Plan of Historic Preservation Action on Montgomery County Planning Board Resolution Adoption Number 25-129 for transmittal to the full commission. Do I have a motion to approve the resolution of adoption for transmittal to the full commission?
I move to approve the resolution.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, 3-0. The next is record plats. We have 2 this afternoon. Subdivision plat number 2, 2026-0050 Tacoma Park, and subdivision plat 2-2206-0290 Merrimack Park. Both staff is recommending approval. Do I have a motion for approval of these 2 record plats?
I move for approval of the record plats.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, 3-0. And next, we have 1 regulatory extension request, the Bennett Road Properties Extension Request Number 3 for preliminary plan and preliminary forest conservation, preliminary/final forest conservation plan. Do I have a motion for where staff is recommending approval of the request? Do I have a motion for approval of this extension request?
I move to approve the extension request.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it, 3-0. Next, we will, do we need to take a? Yeah, just 1 minute. Okay, we'll take a 1-minute break, then we'll start with our next item, the Rosebud House Historic Site, an amendment to the Master Plan of Historic Preservation, where staff is recommending that the board list the Rosebud House in the locational atlas and index of historic sites, and recommends that the county council designates the property in the master plan for historic preservation.
Mr. Chair, just one thing for anyone who's listening. The Battery Lane resolution will be adopted as soon as certain other commissioners arrive.
Great.
We didn't forget it.
Yep, thank you for that clarification there. So we'll come back in 1 minute. Thank you. Good afternoon again. We're on item number 4, the Rosebud House Historic Site and Amendment to the Master Plan for Historic Preservation, where staff is recommending that the Planning Board lists the Rosebud House in the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites and recommends that the County Council designates the property in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. And this afternoon, we have Serena Bolliger from the Planning Department presenting this item. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Serena Bolliger, Cultural Resource Planner for the record. The purpose of today's public hearing and work session is to determine whether the Bud House near Sandy Spring meets designation criteria for listing in the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites and Master Plan for Historic Preservation. The Bud House was built in 1912 by Perry Budd, a Sandy Spring native, lifelong educator and member of the prolific Budd family, who were the earliest settlers of several African American communities in the Sandy Spring area. Overall, staff found that the property meets the designation criteria and requests that the Planning Board takes the following actions. 1, finds that the house meets the designation criteria. 2, lists the property to the Locational Atlas. And 3, recommends that the County Council list the property in the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. Resources listed to the master plan must satisfy historical and cultural significance or architectural and design significance. The designation process includes hearings at the Historic Preservation Commission, Planning Board, and County Council, who ultimately decides whether a resource is listed. In 2022, the current property owner approached the Historic Preservation staff about designation. Staff met with the owner at the home for site visits and worked with them to survey the home. We did research at several archival institutions and discovered numerous references to the Budd family in historic resources and built an understanding of the significant contributions of the Budd family to the Sandy Spring and Olney areas. Next, I'll give an overview about the historic site. So the Budd House is located in Sandy Spring, which is in the northeastern part of Montgomery County, as indicated by the red pin. The Budd House is located at 18583 Brook Road, indicated again by the red pin, about a mile north of the historic Sandy Spring Friends Meeting House and the Sharp Street Church. There are several designated properties in the Sandy Spring areas, including several white Quaker homes, the Sandy Spring Historic District, and the Sharp Street Church and Oddfellows Lodge. This property has never been evaluated. However, we have considered African American resources in this area in the past. In 1976, an African American historic district consisting of pre-1900 era homes was included in the original Locational Atlas for its representation of the prosperous free black community established here during the 1800s. By the time the district was reviewed by the HPC in 1986, it no longer had enough historic fabric or cohesion to be designated as a district, so the history of those families in that community is not represented on this map of existing designated sites. The Budd House has stood in the historic Black Enclave on Brook Road in Sandy Spring, Maryland for over 113 years. The home was constructed about 1912 by Perry Budd. Since it was built, it has remained almost constantly in the possession of his descendants, largely through matrilineal descent. Perry Budd was a successful teacher and education administrator whose path represents the advanced academic success of Black residents in the Sandy Spring community. The Budd House is a 2-story, 3-bay wood frame side gable dwelling with a rear L and a circa 1930s or 40s 1-story rear kitchen addition. So a little about the history of Sandy Spring and the family. So beginning in the early 1700s, members of the Snowden, Brooke, and Thomas families founded a white Quaker community around a fresh spring site and called it Sandy Spring. The Quakers, also known as Friends, in this area consisted almost exclusively of agriculturalists known for their innovation in farming. The Quakers' defining creed champions peace, equality, and community, and they became early adopters of the abolition movement. While many Quakers in Sandy Spring and nearby Brookville initially relied on enslaved labor, the state-level Quaker administration issued a ruling in 1760 discouraging involvement in slavery. The Quakers of Sandy Spring were among the first in Maryland to systematically manumit their enslaved workforce, and by the early 1800s had freed virtually all people they held in bondage. Therefore, Black residents had an early opportunity for land ownership, paid labor, and education. Several free Black communities developed north of Sandy Springs locus, along the road eventually known as Brook Road. On screen is an 1865 map of Sandy Spring and an image of the Sandy Spring Friends Meeting House, built in 1817. Two Black communities developed along Brook Road, the enclave of Sandy Spring and a community called Cincinnati. Elsewhere in Montgomery County, Black neighborhoods developed largely as standalone communities, whereas the Black community in Sandy Spring and Cincinnati existed as enclaves within the white community because of the interracial goodwill they had with the Quakers. Because of their social acceptance within Quaker life, they had access to Quaker stores and services in ways that independent communities did not. Quakers were staunch proponents of education and had supported, provided, or funded Black education in Sandy Spring long before education for African Americans was provided on a public level. We have records of the Budd family living as free citizens in Ashton and Olney since at least the 1840s. Generations of the Budd family have been recorded as important contributors to Sandy Springs Black community growth. They are identified as some of the first supporters of the Sharp Street Church and the Jerusalem Mount Pleasant United Methodist Church. The Budds quickly became prolific landowners. The earliest known landowner is Daniel Budd in 1855. You can see on this map that by 1879, several members of the Budd family, men and women, owned land in the Sandy Spring area, including Lydia, Samuel, J.T., and Hamilton. The subject site is marked with a red arrow, and the surrounding Budd properties are marked in blue. The Budds worked in critical professions within the community, including construction, blacksmithing, education, and transport. Richard Perry Budd, the subject home builder's uncle after whom he was named, Daniel Budd, and Samuel Budd operated a blacksmith shop together to the west of the current Budd house, and records indicate that they worked for several prominent Quaker families and aided in the construction of the Brookville Academy and the Sandy Springs store, and possibly master plan historic sites Cloverly, Oakley, and Bloomfield. 18 acres of Richard Perry Budd's estate on Brook Road were sold for the construction of the Maryland Normal and Agricultural Institute, a pioneering trade school established in Sandy Spring for Black students. Community historians identified 4 circa 1860s Budd family homes in the northeastern Montgomery County Black Oral History Study from 1983 as having local significance, but all 4 have been demolished. The subject site is marked with a red arrow, and the former Budd properties are marked in blue. Now moving on to the builders of our house. Perry Budd was born in 1861 to Samuel and Lydia Budd. Their 6 children likely all attended the Sharp Street School after it was established in 1866. However, Montgomery County's lack of higher education opportunities for Black students indicates that he and his family must have made substantial efforts to secure him the secondary education needed to prepare for college. Despite the structural obstacles to gaining a primary and secondary education, at 18, Perry Budd was accepted to study at the Centenary Biblical Institute, now Morgan State, which he attended for 8 years starting in 1879. According to family history, Perry Budd was in Hampton, Virginia, around 1886, where he met and tutored Amanda, also recorded as Alamanda Armstead. Amanda Armstead was recorded as mixed race in the census, and family history records have her as having Native American ancestry, although those records remain unconfirmed. Perry Budd and Amanda Armstead returned to Sandy Spring together, married in 1887, and Amanda is remembered as a prolific homemaker who supported the Sharp Street Church, won prizes for her baking, and always kept her kitchen open to community members who needed help. Perry Budd was teaching at Linden School, also known as School Number 4, in the Mechanicsville district, later known as Olney, in 1887. He took a leadership role in the county education system, attending the Maryland State Progressive Teachers Convention as the county representative later that year. He continued teaching for at least 13 years in the public school system. In 1905, Perry Budd was appointed by the county school commissioners as the trustee for the Sandy Spring School, where he likely began his life as a student. Perry Budd then worked as a reporter for the Afro-American newspaper in 1908, where he reported on education-related and school board activity. 4 generations of the Budd family have lived in this house. Perry and Amanda's children and grandchildren were raised here and used it as a home base as they traveled out of state to make their fortunes. Perry Budd died in 1933, and the home was purchased by his son, Charles Budd. Zadie Riggs purchased the property in 1953 and lived at the house with her husband, William Riggs, and their 3 children and grandchildren. She worked as a domestic worker and at an MCPS cafeteria in the 1950s, while her husband commuted by bus to Washington, D.C. daily, where he was employed by the British Embassy. Under Zadie Riggs' ownership, the family supplemented their income by selling lumber from the wooded rear of the property. The property passed from Zadie to Mary Alice Rose, who graduated from business school and worked as a supervisor for the National Association of Letter Carriers. Her husband, Ronald Wayne Rose Sr., was an Air Force veteran. Romaine Marie Rose, their daughter, now lives in the home and requested the designation. On the screen are family photos taken at the home since 1920. The house has remained remarkably intact since its 1912 construction, and despite some typical modernizations, retains its striking size, massing, and design. Notable landscape features include the hedgerow in front of the home, which has been there since approximately the 1920s. So the BUD meets two designation criteria as listed in Chapter 24A of the Montgomery County Code, and it retains historic integrity to express its period of significance. So it meets 1A, historical and cultural significance, the historic resources, character, interest, or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the county, state, or nation. The BUD House is representative of the development of the African American community in Sandy Spring. The house was constructed by Perry Budd, a member of the prolific Budd family, which settled several of the free black communities in and around Sandy Spring beginning in the 1800s. Ancestors of Perry Budd were founding supporters of several of the historic churches that the black enclaves used as a social lifeline, and a portion of the family's holdings were used for the establishment of the Normal and Agricultural Institute, a pioneering institute for higher education. Although the Sharp Street United Methodist Church and Oddfellows Lodge have been designated as master plan historic sites, there are no dwellings associated with any of the black enclaves around Sandy Spring designated on the master plan. Most of the resources associated with the black community of Sandy Spring and Cincinnati are no longer extant or highly altered. Therefore, the Budd House is a critical resource that represents a significant and unique part of the black experience in the county. It also meets 1D, historic and cultural significance, exemplifies the cultural, economic, social, political, or historical heritage of the county and its communities. The Budd House has character, interest, and value representing the unique opportunities available to black residents in Quaker communities before and after emancipation. Due to the progressive political environment fostered by the Quakers in Sandy Spring, black inhabitants had early access to education and paid labor and established one of the earliest working and middle-class communities in Montgomery County. Despite widespread slavery and general discrimination, the black community in Sandy Spring were able to gain an early foothold into land ownership and community development, evident from the establishment of the many black neighborhoods and the first elementary and first upper-level black schools for black children in the county. Perry Budd was in the second generation of landowners in his family and was able to construct a large two-story house at a time when many other families of color in Montgomery County were building small vernacular houses if they were able to purchase land at all. Although a house of this size would typically be unusual for a black elementary school teacher elsewhere in the county, this large multi-story home is representative of the type of construction built by second-generation landowners in Sandy Spring, although few examples survive. Many resources, particularly homes, have been lost due to the demolition of late 19th and early 20th century buildings. Preservation would recognize a cultural asset that reflects generations of African American life and underscores the importance of black education to early generations of free black residents. The Budd family were engaged in all aspects of the relatively integrated Sandy Spring community, and while also working centrally in the establishment of the black community. Staff recommends an environmental setting that incorporates the entire about 2.7 acre parcel of containing the historic Budd dwelling at 18583 Brook Road. And overall, again, staff found that the property does meet the designation criteria and requests that the planning board takes the following actions. 1, finds that the house meets the designation criteria. 2, lists the property to the locational atlas. And 3, recommends that the county council list the property in the master plan for historic preservation. Thank you. And I wanted to add at this moment that the owner wanted to be here, but her brother is convalescing in the home, so she's staying home to take care of him. She did submit an email with some testimony, but she approached us for this designation and is very supportive. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation, that history lesson. It's really important for me to hear that and all your hard work in telling those untold stories about all those that greatly helped Montgomery County become what it is today. So we have one person, Karen Burdett, to provide public testimony. Welcome, and you're doing it on behalf of the Historic Preservation Commission, so you had 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Chair Harris and members of the Planning Board, for allowing me to testify today. My name is Karen Burdett. I am the Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. On July 23rd, 2025, the HPC voted unanimously that the Planning Board recommend the 1912 Rosebud House be listed to the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites, and that recommend the County Council designate the property on the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. The HPC came to this unanimous vote after hearing the Historic Preservation staff's report and recommendation to designate the Rosebud House because it met 2 designation criteria, as outlined you've just heard. The vote also came after hearing the testimony of the owner and Rosebud family member Romaine Marie Rose and a lengthy discussion among the commissioners on the value of the property to the history of the African American community in Sandy Springs, an early integrated community in Montgomery County. The Historic Preservation Commission evaluated the lengthy history of the Budd family in the Sandy Spring area dating back to 1840. The Budd family owned property as early as 1855 and supported the local Black churches, schools, as well as the Normal and Agricultural Institute, a pioneering institute for higher education for the Black community. The builder of the Rosebud home, Perry Budd, a second-generation Black landowner in Sandy Spring, received a university degree and was a longtime educator in Montgomery County. The Historic Preservation Commission agreed that the Budd House was an important representation of a free Black community in Montgomery County and also the larger Quaker Sandy Spring community. The Rosebud House has been inhabited for 4 generations of the Rosebud family, predominantly on the matriarchal side. The Historic Preservation Commission recommends the Planning Board list the Rosebud House on the Locational Atlas and Index of Historic Sites and recommend that the County Council designates the property to the Master Plan for Historic Preservation due to its importance as a representation of the Black community in Montgomery County. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation and your really appreciate it that you come out in support of this. So do we have any comments or questions from the board? Hearing any?
Yeah, I'm very well pleased that this home is being restored as the only in Sandy Spring area transition to more modern times and buildings are being raised. It's good to see African American history in that area being preserved. And what is more enlightening is that it is missed that African Americans historically have lived in Sandy Spring and helped establish the community. There's little to no recognition of the African American contributions historically there by the general populace that lives there now. Although the museum exists, it's an afterthought and not at the forefront of everyone's mind. And so I'm very happy to see that this is preserved. And families like this one and other African American families that came before me have paved the way so that my family can live here in the county successfully. So thank you for putting forth this protection for such historic place. Thank you.
I think this reminds me, kind of similar to other examples recently, of how, just speaking personally, I think that I personally learned so much incredible history through these efforts, through your research, that I don't know if I would ever find outside of this process, outside of this room, or just this position that we hold. So it feels, I know I mentioned this I think in the past, but it feels rare to have planning departments capable of doing this type of in-depth research. And I just wanted to thank you all again for not obviously your interest, but also your, you know, your ability, your capacity, your sort of doggedness in tracking these things down. So it's pretty incredible stuff. And I just wanted to thank you again.
Yeah, one last thing. I wanted to say, you know, a lot of thanks goes to Romaine Marie Rose for asking us, you, to do this, because without you, I think she passed the baton to you, and you, for the past 3 years, have been running with it, putting the story together, and that's so important so that others can know. So, yeah, as Vice Chair Linden said, you know, I don't know of other areas that have such a rich planning department that can do this, and it took 3 years, and it's an important 3 years. So I really appreciate that. I'm learning also how they were free before the Emancipation Proclamation and how they were skilled folks and educated folks, and I'm very proud of their family, and I'm all proud of all families that work really hard to make this county and build their family. So, and then what's surprising, you mentioned this was a large home for that era, and so I appreciate learning all the history. And so, thank you for your hard work. Thank you for the Historic Preservation Commission for all the work you do, and we look forward to hearing more and more untold stories. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's all said. I don't have to say anything. Thank you for all the good work. Thank you.
So, do I have a motion, this to state that this project meets the designation criteria for an historic, to go on to be listed onto the locational atlas and index of historic sites, and do I have a motion to all-in-one that the county council designates the property in the master plan for historic preservation?
I move to approve the review of the report and transmit the designation to the county council T&E committee for inclusion in the master plan of historic places.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it 4-0. Thank you so much. And while we have, no, okay, all right. We will take a quick break and go on to item number 5, the 2025 Travel Monitoring Report, where staff is reviewing the report with the planning board and asking that we transmit to the county council, the transportation and T&E committee, these findings. Thank you. Good afternoon. We're on item number 5, the 2025 Travel Monitoring Report, where staff is reviewing the board, reviewing the report with the board and transmitting it to the County Council Transportation and Environmental Committee. So this afternoon, we have Jonathan Ryder and Richard Brockmeyer presenting this travel monitoring report. Welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Richard Brockmeyer, Transportation Planning Supervisor with the Transportation Planning Division. We're excited to bring this item to you today. The Travel Monitoring Report is completed every 2 years and is a compilation of the agency's transportation-related monitoring activities as required by the Growth and Infrastructure Policy. The last report was completed in 2023, and the intent of the report is to help provide a clearer vision of how the county is meeting its transportation goals, objectives, and metrics as defined in Thrive 2050, the Bicycle Master Plan, and the Pedestrian Master Plan. In a second, I'm going to turn things over to John Ryder and Marie Hatch, who's one of our interns, to get into some of the details and the findings of the report. But quickly, I want to note that we have some natural pauses in the presentation for questions. If possible, please try and hold your questions to those pauses, just so we can make sure that we can get through all the material. And also, we may answer some of your questions as we go along. Also, just to reiterate, this is not an item that needs approval. This is just informational. We will be looking to have Chair Harris transmit this to the T&E committee, but there's no approval required. So with that, I'll turn things over to John.
Thank you. For the record, my name is John Ryder with the Montgomery Planning Department. Before I get started, I would like to give a shout out to somebody who's not here to present today, and that was one of our high school volunteers over the last couple of years, Nathan Koifman, who is studying engineering in, I believe, Suffolk University in UK right now. So I just want to say thank you. He put in a lot of work on this project. And also Marie, who is a intern from the Johns Hopkins University. So thank you to both of you. So again, we are here to present the Montgomery County Travel Monitoring Report, and this is a snapshot of the county transportation network between 2023 and 2024. So the first part of our presentation is intended to give kind of just a general overview of travel trends during the 2-year period of this report. Again, this is kind of the county coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So many of these metrics are going to focus on the recovery from 2020 onward. So the first metric I'd like to talk about is auto travel around the county. So the number of auto trips on our interstates continue to rise steadily, and it's notable that on the 270 corridor, we actually experienced about a 2% growth in between December of 2022 and December of 2024 for an overall growth of about 2.5%, while on the Capitol Beltway at Persimmon Tree Road, so on the western side of the Beltway, and at Maryland 650 on the eastern side of the Beltway, travel is still down by about 8 to 10%. The picture that this paints for me is that some of the longer intra-county trips coming into the county or passing through the county into Washington, D.C. have not returned, whereas travel within the county along the 270 corridor has returned. I see 270 being a connector between some of the up-county communities, whether you're driving to a shopping center, taking your kids to school. It's a road that people may be more likely to use as a segment in a route as opposed to the majority of their route. Next data point is that the average trip length remains shorter than before the pandemic. A metric that we've tracked for a while but are becoming more interested in is annual vehicle miles traveled per capita. And essentially this is taking the number of miles that are traveled within an entire year and dividing it by the population of the county to come up with a number of the average of how much people are driving in a given year. So we see that, again, this is down by about 10% or so since before the pandemic. And also that VMT per capita is trending below total VMT. And what this may point out is that people are finding alternative modes of travel as opposed to simply driving in a vehicle by themselves. One of the significant trends to come out of the COVID pandemic is the way that we have worked. Since about 2019, we've seen a 20% increase in the percent of Montgomery County residents who work from home, and about an 11% increase in NADMS, or non-auto driver mode share, which is the percent of commuters who travel by modes other than driving in their automobile. So prior to the pandemic, both of these metrics were fairly steady. After 2019, early 2020, we start to see this trend increase. It'll be interesting to see what happens the next time we come to this report, as the federal government has reinstated or has instated less telework compared to the last couple of years. Moving on to transit, bus transit use has returned while rail ridership continues to lag. So on the two bus services that serve Montgomery County, Ride-On and Metrobus, both experienced about a 3/4 loss in ridership directly following the pandemic or during the onset of the pandemic, and have had steady increase over the last 4 years, returning to their pre-pandemic levels. So again, Ride-On, Metrobus, following similar trends. We don't see the same trend on Metro Rail. Again, it can't be for certain, but one of the story that this points to me is that the riders who are using rail service are going to be those who work in industries where telework is available, or they have alternative modes of transportation. They have access to a car. They might be more willing to walk or ride a bike, whereas people using bus service might be more reliant on that service and work in industries where they're required to be on site to do their job. And in that same vein, we still see that transit trips remain stubbornly longer than auto trips. So this metric we've tracked back since 2015, and average commute time for all modes has hovered around 33, 35 minutes for that entire time period. We've seen a little bit of drop off in the last couple of years, and that may be partially due to reduced volumes on our roadways coming out of the pandemic. But again, during the same period, we still see that transit is experiencing travel times about 1/3 longer. And this metric is kind of a little confusing because that all modes does include transit. But when we look at the overall volume of auto trips versus transit trips, those transit trips hardly factor into that average. Okay, so before I move on, I'll pause for any questions on what I've presented so far.
Thank you for the pause. Couple of things. You said that the pattern of how we work has changed since pandemic. I don't know what happened in pandemic, except that we are doing more, teleworking. So is that the main reason that this has changed, teleworking? Or what else has changed? Because one thing that, I'm surprised that we say that you are not thinking that the metro rail, it hasn't gone to the ridership that was before. But, during the pandemic and since then, we have built a lot of multifamily and offices in downtown area that especially like in downtown Bethesda, in Silver Spring, in Wheaton. And these are all areas that they have access to, metro. Why then is not increased? You're thinking that more housing in downtown area have to add, to ridership more, especially in, metro, ridership. And the other thing, before you answer, I just ask all my questions and then you answer. You said that the transit trip is just 1/3 longer than car. It doesn't look like to me 1/3. It looks like that the transit sometimes is double the car, because car, you sit in the car from your house and you go to work. And if you want to compare it with the transit, it has to be the time from the house, you have to walk to the station, the time that you have to wait for the transit to come, and then from where you get off to go back to work. If we want to be real in regard comparing, I think we have to have a real data, because if I want to take a bus, or train, if it is just 1/3, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing that. But usually from the origin all the way to destination is sometimes more than double. And I think those data should be there. Of course, then when you go there, you don't have to worry about parking. That's something else that is there. So I think that I do not know if the data that you collect to compare these, what kind of data they are.
So I think I heard a couple questions in there, and I'll try and answer them all. The first was, is telework the only change that's come out of the pandemic? I think it's the most significant. But from the data that we show here, right, like people are driving again. So the trips that people took in their car where they needed to take their car, they're doing that. But those trips are shorter. So that would point that maybe they're driving more trips. I think we've seen a big uptick in delivery service. So that can account for shorter trips if we're calling that, chunked trips. And maybe that long trip where mom or dad commuted into Washington, D.C., maybe they're available to stay at home and instead they take their kid to work or go to the laundromat or go to the grocery store. So the number of trips has steadily increased, but the length of each one of those trips may not be as long as that one big trip that everybody took twice a day. So that might be one of the trends that's going on. I think telework is going to be the biggest hit. And again, it'll be interesting to see if we collected this data in a year from now or 2 years from now as office workers and federal government workers return to Washington, D.C. We'll see another little blip because there was a government shutdown, so that'll kind of throw things off. But it'll be interesting to see what that trend, especially in this graph, what this continues to look like. Does this level off and somewhere around 20% continues to be the new norm, or does it drop back down towards that 5%? Let's see, the second question. Metro ridership. I think, again, like if your habit was taking the train from a suburb into Washington, D.C., let's say, and you got out of that habit and you became reliant on a car and that's your new behavior, it's going to take a while for you to readjust because it's so much easier to drive. Even if the trip feels uncomfortable because you're in traffic, I got my podcast, I got my seat heater, I can have the window down if I want to in the summer. Plus the availability to do those side trips on the side or stop by the grocery store on the way home becomes much easier. So I think it's going to take a while for that behavior to reset itself. And again, this is just maybe anecdotal, but thinking about the price difference in riding Metro Rail versus bus or even ride-on now, if you can afford to take the train over the bus, that's a bit of a luxury, especially when it comes to Metro. You're probably more likely to have access to a car, to be able to afford that, and to be able to make that switch. And then again, once you make that switch, it's going to be harder to reset that behavior.
Yeah, but you have a lot more housing now. in where I'm hoping that that's where we are going.
Right, and I think that's it. I think it's just going to take a time, right? For that housing has to come online, has to fill up. Those folks have to reset behavior, and once behavior is set, it's very hard to change.
And to add to that, again, for the record, Richard Brockmeyer, I think, yeah, it's going to take time for all the housing that's been approved to occur around that, and it will support ridership, but it is not, even in those communities, if telework is primarily available to some of those people, they're not taking those 2 days, those 2 trips a day for commute trips. And the system, the train system was built primarily for commuting. And so it will just take time to see sort of the benefit of building higher density and mixed uses around those, where a system has primarily been developed as more of a commuter-based system.
Yeah, and I think it's, to be clear, no matter how much we've approved and built, it's not enough. And we're talking about a county of 1.1 million people, and we've approved a couple of thousand units. Like, it's a drop in the bucket, relatively speaking. So like we've been doing better than we have, but we still need more housing if we're going to affect numbers that from a county of 1.1 million people and the trips that they take per day. A couple of thousand Bethesda's not going to move the needle enough that we're going to see it in a graph like this. And to your point, I think you just mentioned it, that I want to mean something else. Metro Rail is a commuter rail system. It's not the bus. It doesn't do what the bus does. And the bus, if you're off, to your point, if you're teleworking, you can take the bus somewhere or a train or your bike or something like that. The Metro Rail system is to move people from here into DC and back. That's its purpose. Otherwise, it doesn't. You don't go to the grocery store on Metro Rail. You don't take those trips. And so I think this is interesting. I think it's pretty intuitive given what we've.
But you don't go grocery with the bus either.
I think
Well,
more people do that than,
plenty of people do.
I mean, I think a lot more people do that than take the Metro for anything but commuting.
When we have Commissioner Lennon, because I don't know how many more modules you have.
Well, one last
got
question.
lots. We got
He hasn't answered the last question, the data that you collect for the time.
So I'll jump in on that because I actually have the survey question that's asked from the American Community Survey. It's a national data set. The question is, how many minutes does it usually take this person to go from home to work in the last week? So it would be sort of the door-to-door time.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to also know about, the ACS, it's self-reported data, so it's asking people to estimate themselves. It's not actually sort of calculating. It's not this sort of third-party calculation of tracking their, device or something and actually understanding on that level. So there is some error, I think, baked into it too. And I think, yeah, regarding the metro ridership in particular, I think that it's notable just the higher level context. I think, WMATA and Metro Rail, in some ways, although the stations you referenced, mostly in Montgomery County, I think with the exception of Tacoma, 50, 60, maybe 70% of what it was pre-pandemic, but the system is actually outperforming many other systems around the country in terms of regaining ridership, and I think it's trending, largely speaking, in the right direction. And all the reasons you mentioned, I think it takes some time to get back into it, and one of those reasons, using the Bethesda example and like new housing's coming online, but one of the biggest drivers of metro ridership historically, talking about commutes, has been office land use, office uses, or commercial or job uses, particularly in places like Bethesda, right, and other stations that we have, and so although we're putting a lot of housing there, and that's a good contributor, we're losing office space and we're not gaining new office space, and there's this countywide contraction. And it's just a difficult environment to dramatically increase ridership, even if we're putting housing in the right place, because those trips, people might take them, one time a day or a couple times a week, maybe. I think it speaks, but it's obviously transit-oriented development is still beneficial, even if they're not taking metro, because as you mentioned, trips are shorter. They can walk, they can bike. They're still moving around their neighborhood, even if they're not taking transit. So I don't see that as, this isn't like doom and gloom. I think it's sort of like, okay, it's going to take a little time to get back in the right direction. The office environment is really difficult. That'll take some time to kind of right size. and yeah, and on and on. But the other, just very, very quick thing I wanted to note, although driving, at least on I-270, auto trips seems to be back where it was in 2019, 495 seems to be less than 2019 still. I just wanted to focus on that for a second because so much of the narrative that we hear, at least, is that traffic is out of control, it's worse than ever. And in some cases, sure, there are pinch points here and there, but I think that the data continues to show that, memories are short, but the data continues to show that, at least on our major corridors and highways, it's not worse than ever. There's more we can do and more we should do. But sometimes I think, the conversation that we hear, again, kind of is a little bit obscuring the fact that the data consistently shows that average daily volumes are either even or a little bit lower in some places, which I just find to be kind of interesting.
We had a couple of breaks for questions built in. I'm gonna just suggest to the team, in the interest of time, maybe we skip those breaks. The board, of course, can jump in as they please, but we would hold that till the end. Okay. There's a lot of great questions, comments.
Okay, so our next section, so the travel monitoring report traditionally was an element of the GIP. It began as a accounting of development pipeline versus traffic congestion to make sure that we were adequately addressing traffic needs as we built the county out. Each iteration that we've done this, we've tried to expand it a little bit, and now it has become kind of an umbrella report for the monitoring elements of our functional master plans. So we'll talk about the bicycle master plan, the pedestrian master plan. We'll also talk about the transportation element of Thrive Montgomery 2050. So this report is going to focus or look at Thrive through a lens of the county's growth corridors. This is a snapshot from the report itself, but essentially what we've done, I thought I bumped this out, sorry. Here we go. That's not much better. Oh dear. I wanted to bring up this map. There we go. Of the growth corridors around the county. And what we've done is selected a handful of metrics that we wanted to focus on that would give us a picture of how we are doing of building out along the transportation network along these corridors. So we'll talk about 4 of these metrics today. There's some additional ones that I will not cover. But we have created these infographics of each one of the corridors with these selected metrics. The first one I'll talk about today is pedestrian network comfort. So this is looking at the comfort of sidewalks, pathways, trails, and low traffic residential streets where there are no sidewalks along these corridors that are either very comfortable or comfortable based on our pedestrian level of comfort scoring system. And essentially what our data shows is that we're making slow and steady progress along these corridors to creating a comfortable pedestrian environment. We still have a decent way to go. But the way that we're redeveloping our sidewalks, a lot of it is coming in with development. So we're kind of doing it in chunks. But we are making progress. There are a few of our corridors that have large gaps, meaning that there is no pedestrian facility available. We'd like to see those filled in many cases. Sometimes there are parallel routes that are just not captured in these metrics.
One thing I want to point out, if you can bring that back up again, but you see a couple of corridors here that have notable increases that change from 2022 column. That includes Georgia Avenue South, Old Georgetown Road, and University Boulevard, and that's directly attributable to the bus lanes that are creating a buffer between traffic the sidewalk, as well as on Old Georgetown Road, the repurposing of lanes to create bikeways that create that buffer as well.
That is a good point. Yeah,
What are these percentages? Could you explain the percentages?
So what this is comparing is if we take the entire length of a corridor and measure out all of the available sidewalk, what portion scores as an acceptable or gets an acceptable score under our methodology, and which portion is still unacceptable. And then which is just a gap. We call these gaps between sidewalk segments. So basically what we're looking at is how much of our sidewalk network has gone from a place where you wouldn't want to walk to a place where you would feel comfortable walking with your kids. And again, this not only speaks to the sidewalk itself, whether it's wide enough, whether it's level enough, but it also speaks to what's going on in the roadway. What is the speed of the traffic? What is the volume of the traffic? Is there a separation from a bus lane or a separated bike lane or a wide enough barrier so that you feel comfortable walking along that sidewalk? So for the next metric we'll talk about is the bicycle network completeness. So the 2018 Bicycle Master Plan established a goal of creating a highly connected, convenient, and low-stress bicycling network throughout Montgomery County. And this table compares along our growth corridors where existing, under construction, or funded as of December 2024. And again, we can point out that we've made some notable progress on several of our corridors, again, including Maryland 355 North, Maryland 355 South, and on Old Georgetown Road. And again, those can be directly correlated to projects up in the Clarksburg area, the Old Georgetown separated bike lanes, and improvements probably within Bethesda CBD. This isn't adding up to 100% as we move from left to right. This is looking at, along that corridor, how much of the master plan bikeway is existing, how much of it was under construction, and how much of it was earmarked to be built either in the CIP or through development. And looking at it a different way. On average, our Thrive growth corridors have about 18% of the planned bikeway built, with corridors such as Maryland 355 North and Georgia Avenue South, North Bethesda. Maryland 355 South having larger percentages either built or in the pipeline, where other corridors like University Boulevard, Connecticut Avenue, and River Road do not. So the next metric we'll talk about is protected crossing spacing. So protected street crossings provide more safety and comfort for pedestrians and bicyclists because they include traffic control devices that reduce or eliminate conflicts with motor vehicles. The protected crossing spacing is the average distance in feet between protected street crossings for each street type. So this build-out metric is the ratio of what exists on the road and the target spacing that is designated by the street type. So for a downtown boulevard, spacing would be 400 feet. Town center boulevard, 600 feet. And we can see that along our corridors, we can use more protected crossings. I think, if we look out our window, this is kind of something that's intuitive, that if you look at from one intersection to the next, it's a long way. And if somebody's in the middle, the likelihood that they're gonna go up, cross over, and come back down is less likely, or the likelihood that they'll make a risky move to cross that street is more likely. And the final metric we'll look at is street grid build out. So this is a street grid is the pattern of intersecting roads that form a network of blocks and streets. This metric compares the desired number of blocks with the actual number of blocks within our downtowns and town centers. So a ratio of, or a percentage of 100% would mean that the street grid is completely built out, where 50% would mean half of that desired street grid is built out. So again, this is looking on town centers and downtowns, and we can see the areas like Bethesda, Silver Spring, Wheaton score fairly well, where our developing centers like Life Sciences Center, Rock Spring, or the Life Sciences FDA Village have a ways to go. The next section we'll talk about is the Bicycle Master Plan. So the 2018 Bicycle Master Plan envisions a future where Montgomery County is a world-class bicycling community in which everyone will be able to travel by bicycle in a comfortable, safe, and connected bicycling network. It defined 4 goals, which we'll go through now. So goal number 1 is to increase bicycling rates. This metric is largely based on advancing towards completing the other 3 goals. And we can imagine that bicycling rates were likely heavily impacted during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of the data, or many of the sources for this data, relies on surveys, which did not happen to be conducted during the 2-year period. The one data point that we can report is that from MCPS in the fall of 2024, about 1% of students rode their bikes to school. Goal number 2 is to create a highly connected network. So this is looking at connectivity of the low-stress bike network across the county. And here we can report that we're making slow and steady progress. Starting in 2018 through 2024, we've completed about an additional 3%. If we add in everything that was under construction prior to 2024 and programmed or approved, we would get to about 22%. Those numbers look small compared to that 80%. But I think if we look at where we have been building and where we will be building in terms of projects connecting other projects, I think we're really close to seeing a big jump. I mean, if we think about this Capitol Crescent Trail connecting Silver Spring to Bethesda, that's going to be a really big connection. And think all of the other projects that connect off of that or connect into that. If we look at it on a county level, it might not be a double digits increase, but the number of people impacted by those projects, I think will be substantial. I'll talk about I'll wait till later. So in 2023 and 2024, we completed about 7 miles of the master plan bike network. Some of these projects included the Good Hope Road shared use path, shared side path along Hillendale Local Park, Upton Drive Neighborhood Greenway, side path in front of Woodland Elementary School in the Laytonsville area, 8787 Georgia Avenue, the old MRO site, White Oak Town Center side path, and Westwood Square separated bike lanes just off of River Road. During the same period, we had another about 7 miles of bikeway under construction. And those included Marinelli Road separated bike lanes, the MBT Trail Bridge over Georgia Avenue, side path in downtown Kensington, the Capitol Crescent Trail, the Silver Spring Green Trail in downtown Silver Spring. On top of that, there was just about 14 miles of bikeway that were either funded or approved for construction as of December 31st, 2024. Goal number 3 is to create equitable access to low-stress bicycling. So over the 6 years since the 2018 Bicycle Master Plan was approved, we have seen the gap widening, measuring accessibility between our equity focus areas and non-equity focus areas. But I think it's crucial to point out that connectivity in all of those areas has continued to go up. It's not that one's going up and one's going down. I think this metric is highly dependent on where we had been building versus where we will be building. So we've done a lot of work over in the Bethesda area, Old Georgetown Road, North Bethesda, but we have a lot of projects along the US 29 corridor, around the White Oak area that I think will balance this out in the next time we come to do this report. And the fourth goal is to improve bicycle safety. During the 2 years of this report, the number of fatalities or serious injuries involving cyclists on our roadways decreased by 29%, so from 17 down to 12. It's a good jump. We're getting closer to that Vision Zero, at least for cyclists. I will now hand over to Marie.
Thank you, John. For the record, Marie Hatch, Transportation Planning Intern. I'm going to go ahead and follow a similar structure for the Pedestrian Master Plan. We have 4 goals that we've set out to help us achieve a safe, comfortable, convenient, and accessible pedestrian network. So we're going to look at how each of these goals is progressing. Goal 1 is kind of the bottom line. We would like to see an increase in walking rates and overall satisfaction. We know that high rates of walking are associated with improved health, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and vibrant economies. So looking at this graph here, we see that from 2022 to 2024, there has actually been a reduction in the percentage of people that commute on foot or commute on foot in addition to public transit. Again, this can be traced back somewhat to the pandemic. This data was collected starting in 2019, so just before captured the bulk of the pandemic, and then now. So yeah, similar to what John was mentioning before. Our second goal is to create a comfortable, connected, convenient pedestrian network. You see here that the percentage of pathways and crossings that are considered comfortable or acceptable has increased slightly. So we're inching our way closer to that target goal of ours for both metrics. This can be accomplished, as John kind of touched on before, by building new pathways, reconstructing old ones, reducing speed limits along roadways and across pedestrian crossings, and then increasing separation between pedestrians and vehicles. Our third goal is to enhance pedestrian safety. So Montgomery County's Vision Zero goal is to eliminate all transportation-related fatalities and serious injuries by 2030. And this graph shows that we have had a significant decrease from 2022 to 2024 with pedestrians. However, we are still quite a ways away from that Vision Zero goal. So we have a little more work to do. And kind of alongside safety is the satisfaction that people are feeling with safety. The more we see that increase, the more comfortable people will feel. So the percentage of respondents satisfied or very satisfied with safety while walking increased marginally from 52 to 53%. And then our final goal is to build an equitable pedestrian network. We want to see all community members have a network that meets their needs and help us achieve, racial and social equity goals. So what we can report here is that the ratio of severe injuries and fatalities per mile among pedestrians is 4.6 times higher in EFAs than in non-EFAs. This is down slightly from 4.8 in 2022, but yeah, it's.
For the record, again, John Ryder. We'll go over our last couple of sections. So in 2024, the department conducted a bicycle and pedestrian survey. We sent out mailers to just about 57,000 homes and received 1,244 responses for a rate of 2.2%. The survey included questions on trip purpose, trip frequency, duration, and satisfaction with respondents' experience walking, rolling, and bicycling around Montgomery County in the previous 30 days. Some key takeaways from our survey. Countywide, most walking and biking trips were for recreation or exercise. On average, walking trips are about 20 minutes and biking trips are about 60 minutes. For respondents who required the use of a wheelchair or assisted device, their trips, particularly amongst those respondents living in urban or suburban areas, were extraordinarily long, meaning over 90 minutes. And most of these trips were for utility purposes, either going to the market, going to medical appointments. Urban residents tended to be more satisfied with their walking experience than country or suburban residents. And the majority of country residents expressed dissatisfaction with the availability of sidewalks on their route. Also, among country residents who did not walk in the last 30 days, most cited concerns with traffic safety as a cause of their decision not to walk, followed by lack of adequate pathways. Women respondents indicated that their top concerns were personal safety and traffic safety while cycling, while men reported overall average levels of satisfaction. Black respondents made up the majority of those concerned with traffic safety, as well as with the lack of adequate or connected pathways and crossings. And residents, in their responses to the survey questions and in the comment section, expressed dissatisfaction with the behavior of drivers and with enforcement of traffic laws, both for drivers and cyclists. One of the findings that I found particularly interesting was that the comment section also revealed that survey respondents were thinking often and loudly about bicycles. Bike, biker, bikes were three of the most common words, and they were often paired with pleas for more infrastructure, praise for the work done by Montgomery County, or worries that biking infrastructure was underutilized and constructed at the expense of the efficiency of driving. I think this is interesting because it points to this kind of very dichotomous portrayal of cyclists and where they fit into our transportation network. People who do cycle are very adamant about it and want a safe place to do so. Those who don't see it as getting in the way of their commute, and they see that there's not a lot of people riding in those bike lanes. I don't know if this points in any course of direction. It's just kind of an interesting thing to note that we're still kind of wrestling with where do cyclists fit in this whole hierarchy or system of transportation. Okay, so for our final section, this is the first time that we've done this as part of this project, including recommendations. This has typically just been a reporting of data, but this time we tried to come up with something of some substance. So we've created this top 10 list of priority projects. This list has been shared with MCDOT for their consideration for inclusion in the capital budget. And these projects would help to address some of the issues that we've seen in the metrics, especially a greater focus on equity.
Thank you. For the record, Marie Hatch. So yeah, as John mentioned, we came up with, we developed the list of prioritized transportation improvement projects through the course of the travel monitoring report. And these include roadways, extensions, bicycle and pedestrian priority areas, bikeways, walkways, and trail improvements. We initially had a list of 392 projects, and we narrowed that down to 10 of the highest priority projects. Several of these have already been funded in the CIP but require additional funding, and others will be added to the CIP for the first time. Starting out with Observation Drive Extended, Little Seneca Parkway Extended. This is located in Clarksburg and relevant to the Clarksburg sector plan undergoing work sessions. So this would provide a north-south connection parallel to I-270 and to Maryland 355. And this would offer vehicle transit and non-motorized users a more robust transportation network.
Next project is Summit Avenue Extension in downtown Kensington. This would provide an alternate route for traffic through an already congested area, particularly for local trips. This project does have strong local backing. It would help build out that street grid of downtown Kensington and to help realize the vision of the 2012 Kensington Sector Plan.
The Wheaton CBD BIPA, located right here in Wheaton. It has the Blue Ridge Avenue and Grandview Avenue separated bike lanes. Blue Ridge Avenue would provide a east-west connection, and Grandview would provide a north-south connection, both of them connecting with the already funded Amherst Avenue Bikeway.
And both of these projects are identified as Tier 1 projects as part of the Bicycle Master Plan. Next is the Downtown Silver Spring BIPA. We have several projects in downtown Silver Spring that have already been funded. However, additional projects would help build out the network of safe, comfortable bicycling facilities, particularly on the west side of the CSX rail line. So this would specifically be looking at the 13th Street, Burlington Avenue, separated bike lanes and separated bike lanes along East-West Highway.
Just out of curiosity, is I know that the Fenton Street protected bike lanes are also, I think they're also in the BIPA. Have those been fully funded? Is that why they weren't in the priority list?
I am told yes.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Next, we have the Purple Line BIPA. This is located in Littonsville by the new Purple Line station. This would include the east side of Littonsville Place, separated bike lanes right near the station, as well as the Brookville Road side path, which was recently constructed in front of Woodland Elementary School. We showed you a picture earlier. And this would kind of extend on either side. This would help connect the Capitol Crescent Trail, the Purple Line station with the surrounding area.
Next are Cherry Hill Road Bike Facility in White Oak. This would be a two-way separated bike lane along the south side of Cherry Hill Road. It was recommended as part of the 2018 Bicycle Master Plan. This would improve safety and comfort along Cherry Hill Road near the Viva White Oak development, Adventist Healthcare, and FDA campus, and improve connectivity into Prince George's County.
The US 29 BRT corridor combined BIPA is in White Oak as well, extending from New Hampshire Avenue to Randolph Road. This would combine a number of BIPAs into one larger one and would help improve the BRT and increase accessibility.
This is followed by the US 29 BRT corridor combined BIPA North. This is closer to Fairland. It's also recommended as part of the 2023 Bicycle Master Plan, and would include the projects listed here.
The Germantown area combined BIPA includes 5 BIPAs from the 2023 pedestrian master plan. And this is relevant to the Germantown sector plan amendment. This would address several high injury network roadways and then help redevelopment in the area.
And our final project is fully lighting the Capitol Crescent Trail. So ongoing trail construction has provided conduit and to put in lighting along the trail. This would be funding actually lighting the trail. It would build on the investment already made on the trail by the county to improve access to red line and purple line stations at night while improving safety and security. We've reached the end. We will accept more questions and, of course, praise.
Yeah, they were great. Well, well, we wouldn't have enough time to give all the questions and praise, but let me just say this. I appreciate you doing this. It's a lot of data. It looks like the numbers are going in the right direction, even though we'd like for them to move faster. You know, a lot of it, I guess, is related to funding. So I'm very delighted to see you have recommendations at the end, so they can focus when it goes to T&E on what could happen in the next CIP. I was thinking we have 10, maybe next time you have 20. I don't know. So it said, you know, to at least put on in their minds the things that are important. I wonder what's going to happen. You won't even show up in the next 2 years, but how the purple line is going to affect the transportation throughout the region. You know, there, as you mentioned, there are a lot of conflicting things going on. You know, there was the pandemic, then now there's the federal workforce sort of things in flux, and it's the commercial industry declining, and it's a lot of things going on, and they're always going to be masking one another. But in general, I think things are going in the right direction. I think on the Metro line, the DC, one of the things that was a positive is they focus on safety, you know, and having, you know, I don't know, security folks on the, I mean, it made me more safe to feel more safe, feel safer taking the Metro in and out. So also one of the things about, you can let us know later, but what is the ratio? You know, you started out talking about if a car trip is longer than X, you know, versus the difference between a car trip and a non-automodal trip is a certain gap, then people are less likely to take mass. What is maybe a best practices? What do you have to get to in general? I know it's for people to somewhat be indifferent or push them more to taking mass transit, but don't have to answer those questions now. We have a lot to go later, but it's just some thoughts I put out there. But thank you for this. It's a lot of data, and thank you for sharing it with us. Okay.
Welcome.
Any general questions or comments from the board, but allowing them to answer them later, but at least put it on their minds. Okay.
Yeah, thanks to the whole team. Huge effort, I know, a lot of data. So kudos, praise. Thank you. I'd be interested in for future rounds, kind of looking at the bicycle volumes in particular. Like there's, you know, so much of the data historically obviously is focused on commute to work, and I know that ACS, like that's often the best way we can get somewhat reliable sense of how many people are biking around, with the exception of maybe counts at like specific locations and things like that. But just to use one example, if we look at DC and we look at kind of recent ACS data for biking to work in DC, in recent years we wouldn't see a ton of movement. But in terms of overall bicycle trips and volume throughout much of the city, I think the consensus is there's been an enormous jump in bicycle activity. There's also been an enormous kind of increase in construction and protected bike lanes, and those things obviously track. But in terms of our understanding of, you know, to come back to your point about like one of the responses about bicycle infrastructure is like, well, I never see anyone use it. That we obviously hear that a lot. But I'm wondering what other data we can potentially look to get a better idea of usage of our new bike facilities outside of the commute, because commutes may not come back in the conventional way, as we've already talked about. So just curious of your thoughts on that, if we just, just need more counters in more places, if, maybe we take a bit more advantage of like location-based services data. I know that's expensive, but just, interested in your thoughts on that and how we can get a better sense of the return on the investment there, and also just, a better idea of how people are getting around in these communities.
So I think, to point to you're speaking to like cycling within Washington DC, I think like Cabby every year has had like hand over fist increase in number of trips, length of trips. So obviously people are using that system, and I think it would probably correlate pretty well to the expansion of a protected bicycling system, right? Like, I can't say for sure, but anecdotally, like, if you have bikes available, Cabby's building stations, and there's protected bikeways in between them, it's gonna work out.
That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that reminds me of another thing I wanted to ask about, which is exactly that. Is there a chance we could build in Cabby data for stations in the county, and maybe even, obviously there's other operators too, private operators with scooters and dockless
I was gonna
bikes.
speak to my next point. I mean,
Yeah.
again, just anecdotally, if I see the number of school kids, my neighbor every single morning rides a Lime bike. He's got like a bunch of them stacked up the road. And kind of speaking to like evolving trends, building housing near transit, I think if we look at like how younger generations treat automobile versus other forms of transportation, I think they're much more likely to use these other modes as opposed to that kind of like, I turn 16, I get my license, and off I go. Again, with Ride-On being free starting with school kids, now for everybody, the number of kids you'd see getting off these buses, they like almost replaced the school bus. If we extrapolate that out, when, 10, 15 years, when those kids are now working adults and they're commuting, we would hope that maybe they're continuing to take the bus, or they're riding Cabby, or they're riding their own bicycle, or riding scooters, God forbid, for the record, I love scooters. They're super fun.
So is a scooter the number when you say bicycles, or the volume of bicycles? A scooter is included in the bicycle, correct?
Well, we haven't tracked volumes of cycling in any of the metrics we talked about, right? Cycling volume has always kind of been a tricky metric, because we're never going to have like congestion on we have not historically had congestion on our bicycle routes the way we do with automobiles. And congestion has historically been a metric that we've tracked to measure our automobile roadway system and how it's functioning. That's one of the reasons why we have started using LTS. It's we can extrapolate that if we build a system based on statistics of how many people might ride versus do ride versus will never ride, we could say that if we increase X percent of our bicycle network, we might see X percent new ridership. It's kind of like a build it and they will come methodology. We do have permanent counters. There are, you can measure Cabby data, you can probably get some private data from Lime or the other services. There's privately available, data to track cycling. It's biased, and then it's
But
biased
that
toward recreational
includes
cycling.
but those information includes the, scooter also, correct? Because a
Yeah, I
lot
think-
of people.
For the record, Richard Brockmeyer, yes, I think we can look into what data sets are available, and I think it depends on the data set whether that would include scooters or not. It sort of depends on, if we're using count data or we're using location-based service data. There's lots of, this is a very complex question, but yeah, I think we can
Yeah, I
look
think
into
it's
that, how we can
important.
incorporate that in the future,
Yeah.
2028.
Yeah, so we,
Or 2027.
we could continue talking, we need to wrap this up, but we'll have a 5-7 minute break after this. You can talk, people, any more questions after this, but this is wonderful. I think we need to make a motion to transmit it this.
I don't, well, the recommended priority projects, if we want to make motions, I'm just wondering that how we did decide that those are the priorities.
We are
There was
not-
no information given to us, and I don't know if I feel comfortable to say this is the planning board top 10 priorities.
We're not looking for the board to make a motion on this. We
Okay.
would like the chair to transmit the
We'll-
report.
Yeah, we're making about the this is the planning department's.
Yeah.
But could you at one time provide us with the background that how did we decide that, did we included other, like Montgomery County, does it in agreement with the Department of Transportation that these are the top priority projects? Because this is all the modal transportation. It's not just bicycle or pedestrian. This is rolling, biking, and walking, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, it's a
And-
good point
yeah.
you made, but I think in the transmittal letter, it will say that this is planning's recommendation. But I personally agree that the development of building Observation Drive is really important to make the Clarksburg plan
Well, I
happen.
agree on
Yeah,
that also, but there are a
but your
lot
point is
more.
well taken. We'll just say in the transmittal letter that we're just transmitting, these are not necessarily the board's top 10 recommend, but the board, we'll put it in the transmittal letter. If it's that okay with the, and then next time, maybe we can have more recommended priorities and we can look at it 2 years from now, okay? All right, so.
Just one more thing that when you did a lot of these, they are on the county growth corridor areas. And again, you also indicated that many of these bicycling and walkings are recreational. They're not really commuters. It is very important that we consider that a lot of non-downtown areas, a lot of other rural areas, they have lack of bicycle and pedestrian. They do. Although it's not being used for commuting, I see that people are walking and running on the shoulders of really main roadway, that are not the corridor, but they're main roadway that they go fast. I think somehow that needs to be monitored as well also. And there is a lack of those definitely in the rural area for people, although there's not using for commuting, but there is no other place for people to recreate, so that's where they go.
Great. So do I have a motion to transmit the county council the 2025 travel monitoring report to the county council T&E committee?
Yeah, move to transport the report, or transmit the report on transportation. There we go.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Before we leave, we did not vote on one item, a resolution before. Let's get that over so we don't forget. It's Resolution 4901, Battery Lane Preliminary Plan Amendment 1/2022-010A, where staff is, it's just a resolution. So we're, for approval, Commissioners Linden and Pedram cannot vote on this. So do I have a motion to approve this resolution?
Yeah, move to approve the 4901 Battery Lane resolution.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, so it's 302. Okay, thank you so much, and we'll come back at 3:10 and start our next, 3:10 on the dot. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We're on our last item of the day. It's item 7, the final work session of the Clarksburg Gateway Sector Plan public hearing draft, where staff is recommending that the board approve the final revisions to the draft plan and authorize staff to transmit the planning board draft of the Clarksburg Gateway Master Plan to the county council. So this afternoon, we have Clark Larson leading this discussion. Welcome. We look forward to getting through this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Harris, members of the commission. We have brought back a few topics for your discussion, and as you said, we are asking the planning board to approve the draft plan with all changes made over the last 6 work sessions, including some that may be made today. And we'll be transmitting, with your approval, we'll be transmitting the draft plan to the county council for their own review and acceptance of public comments. So as a bit of a reminder, we've had 6 work sessions so far on a number of topics, including on November 20th to follow up on a number of topics. That was a lengthy meeting that we appreciate your feedback on. So we're bringing back a few additional items just so you're aware and to ask for your feedback. And we hope to move forward at this point with the council after this. So this is a review again of the November 20 work session topics. I've highlighted in yellow the items that we're bringing back to you. So we're going to bring some language for your consideration on the Constellation Park recommendations, the green cover recommendation, as well as a topic that we weren't able to cover on the 20th, a proposed closure of West of Baltimore Road to vehicles, either a recommendation in the plan or proposals to study it that was provided by the community. I also wanted to note that your attachment A to the staff report did not originally include all the red lines as was intended. We fixed this yesterday morning, but we intended to have this draft plan show all the red lines on the published document. It did highlight all the text you asked us to show for your review, but we made that replacement as soon as we realized it, and I apologize to anyone who had difficulty finding the changes and seeing what those were. But they're now posted online, and we'll have a red line version available as this draft moves forward. So the first section of planned proposed revisions, we wanted to make sure that you're aware. I think we mentioned this in passing at one of the work sessions, but we've added a note to the reader, essentially a disclaimer at the front of the plan. Some plans have lists, some don't, and in the draft plan today, there are some notes and disclaimers under certain graphics and maps, but we wanted to make sure that the reader knew and whoever is implementing the plan going forward that all images, graphics, figures in the plan are for illustrative purposes. They don't intend to dictate or require any applications or development styles. And so we just wanted to make sure that this was stated up front clearly in the plan. These are always the intention of the plan, but I think it's useful to make it clear to the reader. Any comments or issues on that? Okay. Next, we have a few items to talk about in terms of the Constellation Park, and for that, I'm going to hand it over to our Parks Planner.
Good afternoon, Lily Mernon for the record with Montgomery Parks. So these text revisions are to align with the guidance that you gave us about Constellation Park at the last work session. So these revisions are for consistency with the main recommendation as it's written in the Parks Open Space and Recreation chapter, and it was just not previously included in the staff report's redline version. So the first is in the ComSat neighborhood recommendations, just making the language consistent with the larger recommendation, renaming it Constellation Park, language about being a single park or a network of connected parks that's centrally located on or along Observation Drive and proximate to residential development. And then there's a section just crossed off in the middle to shorten the statement here. But it's all consistent with what's in the larger chapter. And then the next one is in the Linthicum neighborhood recommendations. Thank you. So this revises existing recommendation number 6 to include the language about POPs also applies to any parks recommended for the Constellation Park network. And then the rest of the language and the examples of amenities are consistent with the Constellation Park recommendation, and then specifically also changed the focus from passive to active recreation to be consistent with the Constellation Park goals. And then one last revision for consistency is about the community facilities chapter and the rec center in Clarksburg. There was remaining language about co-locating the rec center with the previous Clarksburg Gateway Local Park. So we've revised that language to not co-locate the rec center with the park, and then expanding the language to include any redevelopment site within the plan area as consideration instead of ComStats in particular. And then we also just wanted to highlight that there are, the maps in the master plan have been revised to remove previous references to the specific location for Constellation Park. So this new revised map shows the main recommendations that are not details about what's within parks. So for example, up in the top of the map, there's the intersection safety improvements and public parking at the library. So that's just highlighting, where these key recommendations are with the intersection safety improvements outside Black Hill Regional Park. And then also expanding, these are the school sites where we have specific recreation recommendations in the plan. And then since we have a very specific location for the Coolbrook Stream Valley Park, that's also highlighted on this map. And with the Constellation Park being that flexible siting and design, it's not shown here, but we do have some sample images in the plan that show examples of like what a dog park could look like or a community garden. So, and that's all the revisions for parks.
So before we move off of parks, I wonder if there were any questions or comments clarifying any of these changes from park staff.
Why don't you just start again, and start at the top, and then just go through it again, because I don't know if everyone saw. Okay, this is where your first piece is.
Yeah.
Talks about.
So Constellation Neighborhood recommendation number 4, there was a remaining language that was not consistent with how we wrote it in the parks chapter. So we've updated it to match, and that's just what this is highlighting. The next slide is the same thing for Linthicum. So we've kept existing recommendation language, recommendation 4, and just applied it to also cover the Constellation Park and focus on active recreation, and then everything else was consistent with how we portrayed it in the parks chapter. And then also highlighting community facilities and the rec center recommendation. So just removing any references to co-locating it with a park and putting it specifically on the ComStat site. This is now broader focus on any site within the plan area. We would support having a rec center there.
Okay. Okay. When we last left this, how is this different than what we had mentioned last week?
So we had, the original language in the community facilities section was not updated, but in the parks, recreation, open space chapter, we talked about removing any mention of co-locating the park. And it was previously recommended for only the ComStat site, and we changed it to be the ComStat site or any appropriately sized redevelopment site within the plan area. This language now says any proposed development within the plan area, so broadening it even further.
I would like to point out that this recommendation really goes to supporting an opportunity for our community recreation center to be located within the sector plan. It may not end up being so. This is going to have to be something that the Recreation Department investigates and supports and works with property owners. This is not necessarily an extraction from development. This center may end up being elsewhere in Up County. We recognize that the Recreation Department has identified a priority for the need for a recreation center somewhere in Up County. Could be Clarksburg area, Damascus, Germantown, northern Germantown. So we are merely seeking to acknowledge that fact, and the word support is really intentional here because we want to have an opportunity to have this explored, but that may not end up being the final location for a recreation center. That's something that the county department and the recreation department needs to figure out at the appropriate time.
So
so it
they
says
don't have
consultant.
anything right now in their, program of requirements anywhere within the recreation department in regard recreation facility?
They have master planned, they have documentation prioritizing this area for a new recreation park. So they do have long-term plans for a recreation center here.
When they say, you say here, it is
In the
anywhere
The Clarksburg area and also
in Clarksburg
County,
area
yeah.
and up county. So it's not specifically in this location.
it doesn't have to be, but they would like to consider if there's space and it works out.
So just for my information, when a plan comes in, how does it evaluate it for, should there be any county facility, rec facility, whatever? Let's just say, how's that done? So an applicant comes in, and regardless of which, it comes, like a development review plan, it comes to planning, and then it's sent out to all the departments, like, and based on, you contact them and say, this plan came in, do you want X, Y, and Z, or just go over the process for
Sure.
public facilities?
Maybe a good example close by would be the Clarksburg Library. So there'll be a recommendation within a master plan. Sometimes it'll be property specific, sometimes it'll be general to the plan area. Make the recommendation for the facility, and then we don't know when these development applications will come in. So yes, in part, we do that by the regulatory process and reviewing applications, and depending on how specific a location that particular facility was, we'll evaluate it either property specific or as part of each application across the plan area. So most recently, you saw there was a specific recommendation for a library in the town center in the plan. A development project was even approved with a certain property in mind in the town center. And even after that, certain amendments, development takes a while at times to come online. Further down the road, that was determined that would ultimately be located an area outside of the town center, still within Clarksburg, just northeast of this plan area. So and that is ultimately being brought online by CIP, through the Department of General Services and library, to be co-located with affordable housing projects. So these things do tend to have legs, and they do tend to take time, and they can be brought online through a development application, or it can be part of a CIP with a property to be determined later within a general vicinity. So,
Okay, great. I'm fine with this language, but you, Francois Curie, you have you have the right to disagree. I mean, whatever you said, you want to put an objection sometime, you can do, and I don't know what the appropriate time to do that, but you can do that whenever, I mean. Yep, you can, please.
Thank you. Because the red line was not posted until yesterday, we did not have time to be able to find this language about the significant change in the language regarding the Linthicum property and parks, and also the language about a rec center. So we had no opportunity to respond. The emphasis on active recreation and larger pops and parks on the Linthicum property is not fully consistent with the kind of park amenities that the contract buyer and developer believes will be best for the community, given the location, the land available next to the stream valley, land that's available next to existing parkland. With the crossing out of the word passive and putting in only active, that's going to be a very sharp directive to regulatory staff that any kind of passive parkland is not going to be given credit. You know, if we had the opportunity to respond, first thing I'd ask for is passive or active, so that there's the opportunity for discussion between the developer and the Parks Department about what kind of park facilities and amenities really fit best onto this property and this new community. So, you know, this is the kind of thing that we would like to respond to, but really, the error in not posting that red line, it just means we have to take this fight to the council. And the fewer discussions we can have at council, the happier council is. So that's our objection. Thank you for letting me put it on the record.
Thank you.
I do have a question. With regards to the rec center, is there going to be more than one landowner responsible for it, or just one landowner? And so the placement of the rec center, how does that work? Is one landowner responsible for it, or all the landowners in the plan area responsible for it?
I think it depends on where the rec department wants to site it, and that they have, you know, it's not, it could be one, it could be more. It just kind of depends on where they think the best location would be when they have the funds to move forward with something like that.
So would the landowners be considered treated equitably if one is forced to put in a rec center and the other one is not?
I don't think they do. I think I have the same question that you have. I don't think they build the rec center, they have to dedicate the land. Is that correct? Or do they ask to build it also? It could be, but the most important thing is first, where it's going to be located. Then during the development, I guess that depending on the credits or whatever it is, the decision would be made either to build it or not. How does that work? Because if the location is not decided and developments come in different areas, different times, so how do they put money aside? Do they put land aside? How do they do that? Because I have the same question.
Right, so if a development is large enough, property and development is large enough, there's a negotiation that take place. Perhaps a property owner may, end up making land available. Again, there's really a negotiation between DGS and a particular property owner if that property is large enough with the development. So again, I'm more speaking back to the Clarksburg Library example as something more concrete. Alternatively, there could be a property that will not be large enough, or zoning otherwise wouldn't allow for some large development that would likely then be acquired for that particular facility. So there's a few different ways that can happen, and it really, like Lily was saying, it depends.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Fusay, you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks. On the Linthicum language, Parks is fine with either going with active or passive recreation, or just striking the modifier and leaving it recreation.
Okay, I was actually gonna ask, was there a particular, could we explore more why that was changed, but.
Active is more the spirit of the Constellation Park system, but it was not intended to
be restrictive overall.
Opposition, yeah.
Okay.
And the social connection, I think, still gets to those passive.
Still addresses those particular issues, yeah, and I mean, I'm fine with the striking as well, actually. I wouldn't.
So we will strike out active and just say and recreation.
Yeah.
Okay. Will you make sure that changes?
Thank you. Yes, we'll do that.
Okay, I'm fine with these recommendations, okay? And are we? Okay, please move ahead.
Is this something that would apply to the ComSat recommendation as well? I don't see that modifier.
No, that's not in the ComSat language. This was just modifying the existing language that was in the Linthicum chapter.
Okay, thanks, just checking.
I have one more question here. Yeah, thank you. Just stay here. I know that we were talking about this Constellation Park to be around close to Observation Drive. So by not showing it here, the language is still intact,
Right.
correct?
Correct, yes. And we have, then this map is paired with some sample images of what those amenities could look like
Okay.
an example of a dog park or a community
Yeah,
garden.
and I just saw that, I made sure when I was reviewing the document that the whole idea for each development, the whole Constellation Park would come at the sketch plan or the first submittal. That even though they're not gonna decide to build it as a whole, but they're gonna show the park as a whole, that how the park would look like.
Yes, at the
Correct. Yeah.
first time they come in.
I just want to make sure it's still there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next section, please.
Great. So moving into green cover, we had a good conversation on the 20th about proposed language that we had brought to you to modify the draft plan language on green cover. And so you may have been surprised to see our position and recommendation in the staff report. After taking a close look at the changes that were being made and those that you asked us to review, we have several slides coming up after this one to talk about how we see them in comparison and how you might apply and implement the various recommendations for different versions. We have some examples in the county to look at. And so first we want to talk about really what does green cover mean? How has it been used recently? And I think I'm going to turn it over to our environmental planning staff to help kick that off for me.
Hello, Christina Sorrento, Chief of the Environment and Climate Division. I am going to attempt to describe what we mean by green cover so that we're all, working on the same page. And Mr. Finley might need to jump in and help me as well. But green cover, essentially, it covers the developed area only. And the reason why is because we use this to reduce heat and provide other environmental benefits right there where there's impervious surface, where folks are living and walking. And that is the purpose of the green cover. So things like forest conservation areas, park dedication, stream buffers that are around the edge of the developed area, those are not included typically in our green cover calculation because it doesn't meet the purpose of what we are trying to achieve there. When we do our climate assessments for the master plans, we must assess whether there's impact of heat on people's health. And that is one of the ways that we always say development does impact heat because it increases, impervious surface increases heat. But one of the ways that we offset that impact is by putting in recommendations in the master plan for green cover. And so that's why we have a recommendation here is to help offset the heat that a development, the actual developed part of the site will produce. And as any recommendation in a master plan, it's a recommendation, it's not a strict code or regulation. So I just wanted to tee that up, and I don't know, Clark, if you have those examples. So this is just an example of what these particular areas look like from a heat standpoint. And you can see that the areas that have more green cover, it could be trees, it could be grass, it could be of anything, they are much lower. The redder that it shows up is the hotter that area is. Do you have the other? Yes, so here's a good example. We went out on an 85-degree day and actually measured heat, and you could see the heat as you would experience it. You could see the difference that the shade makes. And so it was 113 right there on the asphalt in the sun, but the same asphalt in the shaded area was 75 degrees. So there is a big difference when you're adding some shade or some green cover. Can you go to the next? And here's another example of that where it's not shade, but it's grass. So you have in the sun area, it's 158. In the grass, it's 109. And then you could see even in the shaded pergola, it's 129. So, when it's shaded but it's not green, it does provide some benefit but the green cover actually makes a big difference. So I will turn this back over to Mr. Larson to continue this conversation.
Mr. Hampton, just one question. Green area is a defined term in the zoning ordinance, but you're talking about something else, right?
Correct. Green cover is a very specific thing that we include in master plans, and we've been including it in master plans since about 2014, and we typically recommend 35% green cover on developed sites.
Okay.
That's separate from green area,
I
yes. We like to
thought
be
as much.
confusing.
That's why people like me are here. But I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page and that one is a defined term in the ordinance and the other one is used in master plans, and I don't know if it is specifically defined anywhere. It might be defined in individual plans.
It's
But
exactly.
it is not the same as the zoning ordinance definition of green area.
Correct. It's defined in individual plans.
All right, thank you.
So where was 158 degrees?
Out in the sun area, do you see that?
Really,
The
is it real?
asphalt, yes,
158?
this is, it's the asphalt or the concrete, I suppose, there is 158 degrees.
Where? Do we know?
This was Silver Spring.
Wow.
And it looks like the air temperature is 129, is that what the label?
No, 129 is the underneath on the concrete that's shaded.
Okay.
The air temperature was 85 that day. It was July in Silver Spring.
I think it is, I think it is clear to note, though, but it is from this very heat map that you see, slightly above that concrete is considerably bluer on those, in the shade and on those things. We're talking about the surface contact area of the concrete, and then you can see the shapes of the places right there, whatever they are, seats, they look like
But I
tiny
think
little
it puts
flowers.
it more in context if reality, how a human feels, I don't know, this is to me a little bit out of context, that what's going to happen if I'm out there.
Well,
So
So why don't we, why don't we finish this presentation, let's react to the presentation, okay? I know, no, but it's along with something else here.
Yeah, we can come back to some of these examples if you want. So I have two tables now coming up. This is comparing the elements that would be considered green cover in the denominator, what you divide by, to come up with your 35%, for both the public hearing draft, the original language in the draft plan, with the revisions that you asked us to make. And so we wanted to capture what areas are counted to calculate the green cover and what areas satisfy green cover. The yellow box here with the dashes, I want to point out that I incorrectly checked off this environmental buffers row for the option 3 for the planning board revision, but you had not asked us to include environmental buffers for calculating green covers. That was a mistake of mine. And then I want to make sure that it's clear that the forest conservation easements can often be located in stream buffers. This separate row that we're calling out, it would be anything else outside of environmental buffers. So there could be forest conservation easements upland, next to highways and so on, that your revisions would consider to be part of that calculated area. Below, the list below is a couple duplicates, but essentially showing that on the option 1, some of the shade tree canopy cover, essentially everything in private property, and a couple things like shade trees in the public right-of-way, the public hearing draft counted as green cover, and you asked us to expand that. So it's just really checking every box for all these elements that would be located within the public right-of-ways, even parklands, forest conservation easements. So this is a visual comparison. We also wanted to put some numbers to it. So this is a theoretical area. If we say that the total tract area for a development is 100 acres, that would be the gross tract area, not extracting, not deducting anything from that area. That's on the right side. So your planning board revisions consider a gross area essentially. 35% is 35 acres, and then all the elements of green cover that could accommodate that. The option 1 for public hearing draft would consider the net tract area, so subtracting areas dedicated maybe for small parks, roadways, and so on. So the check boxes that you saw above. So what you're left with is a 70-acre net, which is what would determine the green cover to be accomplished in option 1. And then only a few of those elements could add up to accounting for green cover. And what I think it's useful to identify here is that we would expect that some of these areas that are counted in both might be smaller in the revision if a project was seeking to accommodate the revised language because they're accommodating green cover elsewhere and they're not expected to provide it in developed areas. So you see that there's tree canopy and forest conservation easements. That might be 20 acres. Most of the trees may be in that forest conservation easement and less in the right-of-way, the shade in the tree canopy. So some areas are reduced as you go across, and some areas are only included in the option 3. And so you can see both options satisfy the green cover. Option 3 revisions, which we're going to get to some of the text in a minute, you have a lot more green cover, 41 acres in total, but it's not really located as much in the developed area. This is what we're trying to explain, is we believe that opening it up to a more expansive definition can allow green areas that are outside of developed areas to accommodate, even if it's higher. We want forest conservation easements, we want parklands, but it's really the green cover away that can satisfy this.
Can I say one? I appreciate this breakdown. I just want to have one quick response on a couple of just quick points. To my eye, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but to my eye, the main piece on the right column that wouldn't be as close in some cases to where people live, not in all, because there is that sort of centrally located tree stand, which may be retained in some or in all. But the one piece of this list that seems more clear that it's away from people is the tree canopy that you're listing as 20 acres. Even if we take that out entirely, it's so the net, sort of comparing what's left over in the developed area, the difference is really 21 acres to 25 acres, correct? And I would expect some of that 20 acres to be, or a lot of that to be retained, especially if it's included in tree cover calculation. And because it's centrally located, I think it does provide a lot of the cooling benefits, and it's retained forest, a cohesive forest currently. So I just wanted to note that as we're talking about these differences. I think that the net outcome of these options may not be as significant as perhaps some version of this may describe.
Mm-hmm.
The devil's always in the details, but I just wanted to point that out because I think a lot of these other pieces, including the public parks, now that we're at a constellation approach, those likely will be located pretty close to where people live, which is a real benefit. It's a benefit in a lot of ways. And so I just wanted to note that as we're talking about this.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple examples. I think you saw this before, but this is an example of a project that has met 35% green cover. This is a convenience store and gas station, but you can see it's mainly in the interstitial spaces, the shade trees, ornamentals, vegetated areas on the edges. So it's not a large property. It doesn't have any dedicated parklands, but they met 35%. You've seen this before as well. We wanted to bring it back in case you wanted to talk about it, but essentially we're carving out the stream buffers, the forest easements, and everything left over in this colored area would be the net tract area, and 35% of that would have to be met under the public hearing draft plan. This is an early concept that was provided to us for the Linthicum property, and we took liberties with the right side, assuming that 35% is not required. You might see less tree canopy, less green area. So if you're having more green area and coverage elsewhere outside of a developed area, it's possible, this might be an extreme example, but it's possible that it would be less green because we're not focusing attention on a green cover recommendation within that net tract area. And then here's an example in Bethesda. It's a very urban example, we acknowledge, but it's meeting that 35% with intensive green roof and some on-site trees, everything essentially within the private property. So we can come back to these if you want. As you read in the staff report, we're suggesting there could be 3 options for you to consider. We could even start working around option 3 as well if you want to start tweaking that to your interest. So option 1 would be potentially to revert back to the public hearing draft. Option 2, because of our concerns about some of the changes and really opening up this definition, we feel like it's losing its effectiveness and would request, if we don't go back to the public hearing draft version, that it may be stricken and you can still have green cover established in other ways. It just becomes less of a meaningful recommendation. And of course, we'll talk about the revisions that you asked us to make in option 3. So here is the language that we can come back to. If you want to look at it, this is how the public hearing draft was treating green cover in this plan. I'll note that for the Clarksburg Gateway Sector Plan draft, we are actually looking at street trees. We're including more areas than other master plans have considered. Other master plans recently have just looked at private property, everything happening on the site and not counting green cover outside. So we think there's an opportunity to maybe bring in some of those green covers that are immediately adjacent, street trees in the right-of-way adjacent to property. Possibly even an amendment to this could be allowing vegetative cover and stormwater management areas within adjacent roadway right-of-ways. But this clearly does not open it up to anything in parkland or forest conservation easements, outside of development areas. Here's our concern of, if we're really going to option 3, we would recommend that this just be taken out of the plan. It does not consistent with recent master plans. We're concerned that it could be overly complicated. Anyone can do math, but I think to implement it and have that conversation with an applicant, there may be difficulties in implementing it.
Before you move on, you go back one, Clark, I just really wanted to make sure the point of the exercise that we went through, we heard your direction. We went back, we were also instructed to put together a comparison so that you understood what the differences were, bring back the language. When we were going through that process and crunching the numbers, we realized that it's very likely that each application will not only meet, but likely far exceed the green cover requirement, which isn't what green cover was supposed to, it expanded beyond what green cover is supposed to do anyway. So because this was very likely, the bar has been lowered as such that each application will likely exceed this recommendation. We're instead recommending, obviously, that you would remove it if you wanted to go as far as you went. So I just wanted to take a moment to explain that that's why we ultimately are even putting forward this option. We didn't know that based on the conversation necessarily as it was unfolding until we went back and looked after, and we're putting together the materials that you asked us to bring back to you. So I know this one might be a surprise, but we just felt that the bar had been lowered as such, and moving away from what green cover actually is, that we are putting this option in front of you.
Actually, it was not a surprise. I should tell you, I was stunned. I was stunned that staff is actually suggesting something that could, if planning board in a bad situation, we are not going to say no, not to have 35% cover. How could we do that? So, I was just wondering that why this option. I would have been happy to see option 1 and your draft, and what we had agreed, not having that either our option or one option would be just completely remove it. That's not the right thing to do.
So why don't we see if we can come to some, so why don't you go back to me it sounds as if you're concerned that if an applicant could potentially get to the 35 and say, I've done, and not have all the street trees and some of the others. What is the real concern here?
I think the concern is that if you add in the other areas, it essentially dilutes what the green cover is supposed to achieve, and it doesn't actually. We are no longer achieving the green cover as it is. We're achieving other environmental, options that are very important, but we're not achieving the on the developed site piece, and that was really what we're going for with this particular recommendation. And so that's why we think it's important to reduce the heat impact where the development is occurring. And so that was why we put in the recommendation as we did for the green cover. And I know that the team has come up with some, additional things that we can add in, considering that we haven't done on other master plans, like including, trees within the right-of-way, canopy within the right-of-way, things like that, and vegetation within the right-of-way that we haven't included in other master plans to kind of give a little bit more ability to meet the green cover on site. But I think that's the concern, is that you can easily meet 35% quote-unquote green cover if you basically take all the environmental pieces together outside of the developed area and on the developed area without having to do anything additional.
I think this is a really good conversation to have. I think we should continue the conversation about sort of what the intent and kind of, in some ways, this is a unique site compared to other properties and how it develops, because it's such a large area and it includes features that many other sites don't already include. But what I'm hearing is the sort of the nexus of green space and people, right? We want it where the people are typically are. And so the most obvious place, obviously, is where they live. But that's also to me, why it makes intuitive sense that we would include the right-of-way, because that's where people will be walking, that's where people will be biking, that's where people will be catching the bus. So that's, I think, the reason that we sort of, expanded it, because it seemed to still satisfy the intent. And same with parks, because those will be very active social spaces that do provide real cooling benefits, as long as they're designed in kind of a way that has those benefits as well. And so I think, just speaking personally, I hear you and 100% agree with the purpose, the value of what the green space provides. I think that looking forward to future efforts, there might be alternative ways we could consider kind of getting at the same outcome. And I don't need to go into sort of the details of that now, because I don't want to introduce more complications at this stage. But I'm personally, I think that if I remember the conversation correctly from a few weeks ago, it felt like we were trying to clarify a few things in a way that, and I understand that kind of as you went through the calculations, maybe it felt a different way. But 3 of the 4 differences in the numerator are simply saying what you had originally recommended on private land, we would just expand in this instance to public right-of-way, right? And the 4th difference was the conservation easements. And so I think in at least with 3 or 4 of those, I think we're sort of consistent with the intent. It's where the people are. And, we can talk more about the conservation easement piece, and those are in different places. We know that there's 16 acres centrally located on the site. So that's a good chunk there. We don't know how much of that will be retained or proposed to be retained. But again, if we're talking about cooling benefits, if we're talking about public health benefits, if we're talking about where the people are, I think that the changes that we recommended, again, just speaking personally, I think the changes we recommended satisfy the intent and also help accomplish a positive outcome and benefit to the people who will be living there. I don't see it as diluting, what has to be done elsewhere as much. And if we're worried about that, if we're worried that they're not going to put street trees, then, in the future, we could be explicit about that. We could simply say, instead of green cover, street tree requirements of a certain spacing in proximity to X, Y, Z. There's different ways, I think, again, that we can kind of get at this. Because, again, although I hear the intent and the value of green space as a category, the different component parts of green space are also very different from each other a lot of the time, and they do provide different benefits in different places. And so it just may be worth kind of talking a little bit more about this in the future and trying to have a little bit more nuanced conversation about maybe what is more relevant where, and making sure that, we're providing both flexibility and still satisfying the intent. And I think in this case, option 3 still does satisfy the intent.
Yeah. So my recommendation, if you go back to in many ways, I agree with you, but to the table, okay?
To the table, okay. I wasn't sure. To this numbers table or the check?
Yeah, can we also achieve both by saying in the language, we go with the option 3, but prioritizing street trees? I mean that they check that box first or something, like it's staff is reviewing, like to in those areas where if there's a lot of, streetscape and so that is one of the first boxes along with other, but so that we are getting some discussion with the applicant about, you gotta, the street trees are very important and stuff like that, and focusing, but they gotta check that box one of early, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, can I ask a quick clarifying question before we get to the details on that? What in the revision 3 changes from net to gross tract area? Because I'm not clear with even the red lines on option 3, what changes us from net tract area to gross tract area, which I think is honestly a bigger piece of this than anything else. I don't think that there's, we've had total developed area, which in a net tract basis, excluding some of the things that roadway dedication doesn't dictate, that brings it out. What in this red line, which is the board, the write-up of the board's intent from the last couple of conversations we have, changes us from net to gross tract area? I think this comes along with sort of what Commissioner Linden was saying about the biggest difference is that 20 acres worth of trees in the middle that we're talking about. Yeah.
No, but you're talking about as you read it,
That's what I'm saying, is as I read it. So we have a table that's determining the difference. This is a numerator denominator question. I'm asking where from net to gross we go. Where does this language change us from net to gross? Because I'm not clear that actually is a change. I'm not clear on the language that's being changed here, that we're going from a net tract area to gross tract area. That is put in the table. I don't see where this language just changes us to gross tract area. We're still talking about the developed area, the tract that will be developed. We're still talking about placing that 35% within a developed tract area, like net tract area. We're not counting certain things, dedications and stuff like that. And I think to the larger question, we have a question here of purpose and priorities. And our purpose is to maintain areas in which people are not suffering from heat exhaustion, essentially, because as we're all well aware, it's going to get hotter, all right? And so the places where people are, we are encouraging there to be green cover, shade, trees, et cetera, even with the number 3, the option 3 revision that we have. And the other thing we got to do is find places for people to live. And the more we start chipping away, the less places there are for people to live. This is not a tract that will support large-scale compact multifamily. It just won't. It doesn't have value for it. So how do we balance those priorities? And I think, and maybe I'm wrong from the last couple of times, that we've been clear on what the priorities are for what we want out of, essentially these 2, pieces of property. But I'm wondering where with the edits that have been made from option 3, we're actually making a change from net developed area to gross tract area, and I'm still not sure about that.
I think that we went from net tract area to almost gross tract area, and that is the language that we're showing, because you have still excluded a few pieces that would not be included. So if we said gross, that's everything.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what's on the table that we have. But where is the extra, the acre, this is, I think, Commissioner Linden's point, is you take out the 20 acres of trees for which we have forest conservation requirements. We're already taking out stream valley dedication. I'm not sure that I'm not sure where the math is here it's not clear for me. And I think that the language still indicates that there needs to be green cover within the developed area from the language that we read on option 3. And I don't think I don't think we're moving to a gross tract area as it's being stated in the table is what I'm trying to clarify, and I'm not clear on that.
I thought we were still excluding the roadway dedication areas and environmental buffers. Mm-hmm. So that in and of itself would not be gross tract area.
That's what I'm saying. Go back to the table. The table says the difference between net and gross. All right. This is my issues. Tract area.
Go back to that. Then the next where you show what is there. You go.
Yeah, and and this is what I'm saying is we want
I think the numbers are not consistent with these check boxes.
And that's what I'm.
The biggest change is the green cover elements are more expansive.
Yes.
Accounting for anything in that gross tract area to accommodate. But I think you're pointing out an important discrepancy here between the tables.
Yeah, and I'm just having trouble figuring out, like, I think the language in option 3, that's relatively close, I think, to what the board was requesting, doesn't necessarily move the green cover out of the developed area. It still maintains it within net tract and developed areas in the language that we have in option 3. So our concern at all, we're outside of our environmental buffers, we're pulling the thing. We're treating this as one, and two in this case is really just two big properties. And that we're treating them as sort of one piece, and this will be, you know, an entire neighborhood community, whatever you want to say. But I think we're, you know, again, it's a split between, you know, our overall purpose for the green cover and the environmental requirements, and the fact that we have to balance priorities. And this is not a place where we can have compact, high-density multifamily development at this point. It won't support it. And so we want the green cover in there where people are going to be. We want it to be environmentally safe and cool where people are going to be. And I think that we want to focus our green cover and environmental focus on where people are going to be, which is out amongst the constellation of parks and things like that. So you know, I think this has been made more complicated than we intended it to be when we're discussing what our priorities are from the board.
So we said so I guess it's the differences in the top and what's in the denominator. But we do say we do want street trees, you know, right? And you want shade tree canopy, private and on the public right-of-way, right? We want the tree canopy. We want the vegetative cover. We got the vegetative cover or landscape area in the public right-of-way. That's not checked. We wanted that, right? That was on the right. We wanted, it can be in the left. So I guess the point is, what is in the denominator? That's affecting, and in this 20 acres over to the side there, you say.
And the denominator is really just the way to figure out how much green cover to calculate, right? How much of the area of a development site. Right. It's not where it is, it's how much area
that's the net
is calculated.
That's the net area.
I think the most important part is what elements qualify as green cover and where are they, but the denominator can be larger or smaller depending on whether it's a gross or net tract.
Well, I think you could have 3, but if you say that you must prioritize the street trees and stuff like that, I mean, it gets to what Christina was, you know, at a minimum, you have to have the street trees, right?
Yeah, for the record, Steve Finley with the Environment and Climate Division. I appreciate very much this conversation because I think actually it sounds like we're not as far apart on what we're trying to achieve here as we might have thought before. And absolutely, this is, the location is what's critical here. The location of the green cover makes a big difference. It's very location specific. And so the notions of making sure that street trees are included in here is going to be moving, you know, trees closer to where the people's houses are, where the sidewalks are, where the bike trails may happen to be. We really intended that, you know, this area include, you saw the slide about how much cooler it is on lawn. You know, a number of these houses are going to have lawns, maybe not all of them, but that's the whole intent. If you've ever, you know, walked across a hot parking lot and then stepped onto a grassy area, and you notice immediately a difference because it's so location specific. If you then walk under a shade tree, then you're going to notice a real significant difference because it is so location specific. You may step out from under that tree and not go very far, and it feels a whole lot hotter. Okay. So what it is, that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to get these things into where the people are.
But under the street trees, we are required to have street trees anyway, regardless of this 35%, correct? So we have that requirement for a street tree. So whatever happens with this 35%, you shake your head. But street trees are a requirement that we have to have.
Are they a requirement? Are street trees a requirement of plans?
not under this 35%. Even though if you don't have this 35%, okay, street trees are a requirement. Also, in the master plan,
They don't know, they didn't, our street trees a requirement of,
So in roadway cross-sections, we often have a part of the roadway design to provide
Street
buffer areas, but it doesn't specify necessarily how frequent and how often trees are established. And I've often heard that there can be an intention from a site planning approval standpoint, once you get to construction and installation, that can change when you're in the permit process. So I think there's less of a expectation to have as frequent of street trees as you might imagine initially that actually gets installed
well, I
later.
don't know, as much as I have been in transportation, in permitting, in the park, and street trees were a requirement. That's what I know, okay? Now, I do not know the spacing or whatever. We had to make sure that we provide a space buffer, and we had to plant trees. It was even requirement of what species we have to put. I even know that. So maybe we have to check and see, maybe that has changed, I don't know. But the other thing is that in here, in the master plan, we provided requirements for the parking lot, that what percentage of parking lot should be tree covered. So that has nothing to do with this 35% either. So one
It
of
has
the...
to do with it in that it can help satisfy it, but it is a separate
Yes,
standard.
but
Yes.
I'm
Yes,
saying
it
that
can
even,
apply.
yeah, if you can apply to it, but I'm saying that even though if we are concerned, I keep hearing that we need to have the canopies where it is needed. And I'm saying that in two areas that we are concerned was is the parking lot, regardless of how we define this 35%, the parking lot, they're gonna get the 50%, if I remember it, and the street trees that we are concerned, they're gonna get their street trees, regardless how we define this 35%, okay? So that's one less concern to be concerned about. That's what I'm trying to explain.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think in the, when the staff reworked some of this and was bringing you some additional flexibility, we did introduce the idea of being able to count street trees in our, in trying to provide that flexibility. I think Clark is right that one of the issues we do run into is that sometimes the spacing of the street trees can get adjusted during the permitting process to the point where they're no longer as close together and providing, kind of the continuous shade that we're
okay,
hoping
so
for.
let's just, so as we can wrap, if we just go from this wording here, just go to what can be counted. It says, if we use this language, green coverage may include the following areas. Each individual in combination, these areas may be located on private land or on land dedicated to public rights of way or parkland. We have extensive green roofs. We all agree on that, right? We agree on tree canopy cover. This exclude environmental buffers, right? Are we okay with?
That's referencing the stream valley dedication, is that right? That's fine.
Okay.
Just make sure that's.
Vegetative cover or landscaped areas deeper than 6 inches. We all agree with that. It's just, that could be grass, whatever, but it's got to, whatever. Grain gardens, bioswales, and other underground stormwater management areas, above ground storage, whether they're on the property or off the property, right?
Correct, because leading into the letters is private or public rights of way. Yeah, so all A through E is in both public and private rights of way and parkland.
We're okay with, everyone okay with that? Yeah. And then landscape.
For the above ground and stormwater management areas, you may want to just confirm that they're green. Because there may be some stormwater management that they may not be green.
But I guess you were talking above ground, they're catching stuff, they're whatever. I think it's, I mean, that's why.
I don't know if we have to be literal about the color green. I mean, as you know, there's rain gardens may not have a ton of actual green material, but they still provide. So I don't know. you know, I
Maybe
take the
you
point
should
that
say
we don't want it to be
impervious.
we don't want it
Maybe
to
you
be
should say
impervious.
pervious.
Yeah, we don't, yeah.
I was thinking this would exclude underwater vaults, you know, there's.
Just say pervious.
Yeah, I
I'm
get the
sorry.
above-ground piece, yeah.
Yeah,
Pervious.
yeah,
Not
okay.
kind of
Okay.
addressed,
Then
yeah.
it's the landscape, parkland, privately owned public spaces, and other open spaces and recreation areas. And the port, I'm fine with that. I don't know if, you could, I mean, you guys are okay with that? Yeah. Yeah. And then solar installations and blah, 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 blah. So, but the important thing, I hope it helps with planning and us too. These things will be near in the built environment, in the built. These are, I mean, you know, on the developable land, right? I mean, most of it, you know. So, I mean, but the priority is if you have this tree cover, these other things, I think that this is what we wanted. We wanted the vegetation in the right-of-ways, we wanted the rain gardens and stuff, and so what is, I don't, what's wrong here? I mean, just think, aren't you getting what you
Nothing's
wanted,
wrong.
the green?
I think we're willing to go along with your direction. I think
yeah.
we were wanting to, you know, state our case and have a
Right.
conversation about it, but.
Like I said, I just want to clarify, we were asked to bring back the table, the comparison. We did that in that research. We found what we found. We made our recommendation, but at this point, absolutely, this is the pen's in your hand, and we're at your service. So if you're fine with this, this is your document at this
Yeah,
point.
it is our document, but the point is working with you. Is this getting the green in the developed area? I think it is getting the green in the built environment. Where?
I mean, I guess to not to put too fine a point on it, but, you know, whether it's a yard or store, or, you know, whether it's a yard in front of a townhome, you know, an actual, you know, 6 by 6 foot plot of, you know, whatever grass you have, or it's rain gardens and street trees, what we want is the green cover within the built environment, not necessarily, you know, too picky about exactly where it would be. And if it's within a dedication in front of a townhome, or if it's a 6 foot plot of grass within a townhome, you know, as long as the green cover and as long as the environmental piece is within the built environment, quite honestly, what to us makes that difference?
And I think with the developers, you have some, it says here, the goal is this green cover area is intended to ensure adequate green or shaded areas within the built environment, right, for that. So when plants are come, then you are able to review them, and you should be reviewing them over that general concept, okay? Okay.
We will evaluate a development application based on the criteria that you're establishing. We will do that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you for hashing that out with us. We're going to have an additional discussion. I'm going to bring up a friend in our Transportation Planning Division. There's one last issue that came up, a proposal to close West Old Baltimore Road, and we wanted to, you know, make our case and share that with you and have a conversation. So.
Thanks, Clerk. For the record, Richard Brockmeyer, Transportation Planning Supervisor for the Transportation Planning Division. This was discussed previously. It was a suggestion by River Falls LLC for a possible dedicated pedestrian and bike passage / wildlife crossing as an alternative to Little Seneca Parkway. We do not recommend proposing or studying this street closure in the sector plan. The forecasted volumes on West Old Baltimore are anticipated to be between 11,000 and 17,000 vehicles per day by 2045. We also feel that this reduces the street network overall. It reduces travel network redundancy. It would divert traffic through existing and proposed highway interchanges, causing conflicting movement volumes and through Cabin Branch and the future ComSat neighborhoods. So adding volumes that would not need to take that if West Old Baltimore stayed open to vehicles. And it's counter to the Thrive Montgomery 2050 vision of expanding the street grid. It also reduces accessibility to Black Hill Regional Park from the east. And if you created a trailhead, sort of where you end, or where you would close that, that's pretty far from the main park amenities that you're asking people to travel from that trailhead into the park. It's also not as effective wildlife crossing as enhancing Little Seneca Park, Little Seneca Creek, sorry. The culvert under I-270, we feel that's a more appropriate location. And it could not be implemented until the Little Seneca Parkway Bridge or interchange is constructed. So this would not be something that could happen in the near term to provide that crossing. So for those reasons, that's why we would recommend not including that and not doing further study on that street closure. So happy to take any questions or comments.
So I personally agree with your recommendation. I think the key to this plan is to get Observation Drive completed, and then to get whether it's an interchange done or the overpass over Little Seneca Parkway. And so by that time, it's, I don't know, 10 plus years, 15 years from now. I mean, I don't know when all that's going to get done, but then, and at that time, when all that's in, if they want to go and evaluate it and see after everything is in and working, that's fine. But right now, my recommendation is to go with your recommendation, the staff's recommendation.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just wanted to give it some air. So that is all we have brought to you to discuss at this work session. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us anything that you saw as possible changes, minor edits, major edits, striking whole sections, hopefully not. But the last slide after this is our just straightforward recommendation to approve the planning board draft. So if there's anything else that you wish us to accommodate, happy to discuss it.
I just want to thank you. It has not been easy. I know we are not easy to deal with, but you guys did fantastic. It was a lot of discussions and a lot of modifications, a lot of questions that you brought the answer back to us. And I think that we have something to submit to the county council that I personally am proud of. I think that hopefully this would achieve the goals that we have for Clarksburg. We have made many compromises in here. I know you have made a lot of compromises to what you believe that you originally wanted and what we work together. So I truly appreciate that, and I thank you for having the discussions and letting us to discuss openly. And you were open to it, to make modifications. And I think we have something that is very workable. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to say thank you. It has been a tough sector plan. One, because we're trying to balance a lot of needs, environmental needs, development needs, transportation needs, and also with the stated goal of also moving this plan, making it implementable as soon as possible, right? We talked a lot about, a big part of this was this like economic development, and we had a lot of discussing about the concept site, should the existing building stay, not stay, it's balancing all those. We want to make sure that we can create economic development on these properties as soon as possible, the Linthicum and the ComSat and other properties around here. So that was a big goal of ours, and so it did require a lot of compromises, but I also feel that this will be a good plan that we could send to the council, that they could approve without a lot of changes, and it can get going quickly. Also, sending the signal to Department DOT that they need to get that Observation Drive going as quickly as possible, and we can put a lot of pressure to make sure that they fund that in the CIP. So thank you. It's been a lot of hard work on everyone, and we appreciate your hard work, and we look forward to getting that final copy over to the council as quickly as possible. So thank you.
I mean, it's only the 7th work session on this particular sector plan. How hard could it have been? No,
I could keep going.
Yeah, no, we can keep, I think we all know we can keep going. But no, agree with the chair and Commissioner Pettit, and thanks y'all for bringing all this back to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I wasn't looking for praise, but I appreciate it.
I'll just add my thanks to the team as well. Don't have much to add to what's already been said, but a lot of hard work over a long time, and I think it's a good final result. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. So do I have a recommendation to approve the planning board's draft of the Clarksburg Gateway Sector Plan incorporating all the requested revisions to the public hearing draft for transmittal to the county council as quickly as possible?
Yeah. Move to approve the Clarksburg Gateway Sector Plan incorporating the revisions and transmitting to the county council.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you, and this ends our planning board meeting for today, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thank you.